Tonight, Chicago stands at the center of a national crisis, its streets and neighborhoods thrust into the spotlight as the nation grapples with a moment unlike any in recent memory. Welcome to Space Nexus. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. The city, long known for its resilience and vibrant culture, now finds itself at the heart of a political and constitutional storm. President Trump's decision to deploy federal troops has ignited a fierce and deeply polarizing battle over the limits of presidential power. The move, announced with little warning, has sent shockwaves through the city and across the country, sparking heated debate in Congress, on cable news, and in living rooms nationwide. This unprecedented action pits the federal government directly against state and local leaders, raising urgent questions about the balance of power in America. Governors and mayors are now forced to confront the reality of federal intervention in their own backyards, as military vehicles roll down city streets once reserved for parades and protests. For Chicago's residents, the sudden arrival of armed troops brings a wave of uncertainty and fear. Families gather around their televisions, anxiously watching the news, while neighbors peer out their windows, wondering what tomorrow will bring. Many are left questioning what this means for their safety, their rights, and the future of their city. The White House insists that this intervention is necessary to restore order and protect American lives. Yet critics, including local officials and civil rights advocates, warn that the presence of federal troops could inflame tensions, deepen chaos, and further divide an already fractured nation. At stake is more than just law enforcement policy. It's the very foundation of American federalism, the delicate balance between national authority and local autonomy that has defined the country since its founding. The Constitution is being tested in real time as leaders and citizens alike grapple with what it means to be American in this moment. Can a president send troops to a city against the explicit wishes of its governor and mayor? That's the legal and constitutional question now, at the heart of this historic showdown. Courts may soon be called upon to decide where the boundaries of executive power truly lie. The outcome of this confrontation will set a precedent for every city and state in America, potentially reshaping the relationship between Washington and the states for generations to come. Other cities are watching closely, knowing that what happens in Chicago could one day happen in their own communities. As legal battles begin and the media descends on Chicago, the eyes of the nation, and indeed the world, are fixed on the city. Reporters scramble to capture the mood on the streets, while residents share their hopes and fears for what lies ahead. In this episode, we'll examine the administration's justification for the troop deployment, the passionate resistance from Illinois officials, and the real-world impact on the lives of ordinary Chicagoans caught in the crossfire of history. This is a pivotal moment in American history, a turning point with consequences that will echo far beyond the city's iconic skyline. The decisions made now will shape the nation's future and define the legacy of this era. The world is watching to see how this defining chapter will be written, and how the people of Chicago and America will respond to this extraordinary test of democracy. The Trump administration justifies the deployment of federal troops as a direct response to what it describes as rampant crime and escalating violence in Chicago. Officials point to a surge in shootings, homicides, and other violent incidents that have gripped the city in recent months, arguing that local law enforcement is overwhelmed and unable to restore order on its own. The administration claims that without decisive federal action, the safety of both residents and government property is at risk. As further justification, officials highlight a violent altercation outside a federal ICE facility, using it as evidence that federal intervention is necessary to protect not only lives, but also critical federal assets. They argue that these incidents demonstrate a pattern of lawlessness that threatens the stability of federal operations in the city. President Trump frames the deployment as an essential step to restore order and prevent further chaos, especially after a high-profile incident in which an armed woman rammed law enforcement vehicles during a protest. This event, widely covered in the media, is cited as a turning point that underscores the urgency of federal involvement. The administration contends that local leaders have failed to maintain control, insisting that only federal forces have the resources and authority to secure federal installations and ensure the safety of government personnel. They emphasize that protecting these sites is a federal responsibility, especially when local efforts fall short. This move is part of a broader strategy that targets cities led by Democratic mayors, linking the deployment of federal agents to ongoing national debates over crime, public safety, and immigration policy. The administration argues that these cities have become hotspots for unrest due to what it sees as permissive local policies. The Pentagon has disclosed that hundreds of National Guard troops from Illinois and Texas are being federalized, a move that further escalates the administration's unilateral approach to law enforcement. This decision signals a willingness to bypass local authorities and take direct control of security operations in major cities. The decision to override state and local authority marks a significant escalation in the ongoing conflict between Washington and local governments, raising questions about federalism, the limits of executive power, and the future of local control in American cities. In the heart of the Midwest, Chicago and Illinois leaders are pushing back against the administration's narrative, refusing to accept what they see as a misrepresentation of their city's reality. They accuse federal officials of distorting crime and employment data, using selective statistics to justify a controversial political intervention that many here believe is unwarranted and even dangerous. Governor Pritzker, standing before reporters, highlights record-low homicide rates and a surge in employment, insisting that Chicago is not a city in crisis, but one on a path of steady progress and recovery. He points to new jobs, revitalized neighborhoods, and a community working hard to overcome its challenges. Yet, recent protests, quickly labeled as riots by the White House, are seen by many Chicagoans as a passionate response to aggressive federal immigration crackdowns. These actions have sparked widespread fear, anger, and a renewed sense of urgency among residents who feel targeted and unheard. Critics argue that the heavy-handed tactics of federal agents have only escalated tensions, provoking confrontations that are now being used as justification for an even greater military presence in the city. Many worry this cycle of force and resistance is deepening divisions. In response, Mayor Johnson has established ICE-free zones, aiming to protect vulnerable residents from federal overreach. But these efforts have further inflamed the debate, as local officials struggle to balance public safety with the rights and dignity of their communities. While the administration points to short-term spikes in violence as evidence of chaos, long-term trends tell a different story, one of gradual improvement and resilience. This clash over data and perception fuels a heated debate about whether Chicago is truly in crisis or steadily making progress. For many local leaders and residents, the deployment of federal troops is seen as political theater, an attempt to rally a national base ahead of an election, rather than a genuine effort to improve public safety or address the city's real needs. Governor Pritzker and Illinois officials have launched a fierce legal and political battle to block the federal deployment. The state's lawsuit argues that deploying troops without the governor's consent violates the Constitution and state sovereignty. A federal judge has recommended pausing the deployment, but the administration plans to proceed, escalating the standoff. Pritzker describes receiving an ultimatum: call up the National Guard voluntarily, or have them federalized by force. By refusing, Pritzker forces the president's hand, making any military presence a direct challenge to state authority. The legal fight in Illinois is now a central front in the national debate over executive power. The Chicago crisis echoes the recent federal intervention in Portland, Oregon, where a judge blocked a similar deployment as unconstitutional. That ruling criticized the administration's rationale and warned against blurring the line between civilian law enforcement and military power. Illinois now draws on this precedent, arguing that the Posse Comitatus Act and the 10th Amendment limit federal power over states. The administration's emergency appeals show its determination to press forward, despite legal setbacks. With California also threatening legal action, the stage is set for a multi-state legal war that could reach the Supreme Court. The outcome will define the boundaries of presidential authority in the modern era. For Chicago's nearly 3 million residents, the deployment of federal troops is more than a political fight. It's a daily reality. The presence of soldiers on city streets brings anxiety, especially in communities already wary of law enforcement. Some hope the troops will bring security. Others see them as an occupying force, deepening mistrust and division. The city's social fabric is strained, with polarization threatening community relationships and public safety efforts. Economically, Chicago's reputation as a vibrant destination is at risk, with tourism and business facing potential losses. Civil rights groups warn that troops may not be trained for civilian interactions, raising fears of free speech and due process violations. Mayor Johnson's ICE-free zones are now overridden, as federal authority supersedes local protections. Chicagoans find themselves at the center of a national debate over security, liberty, and the future of American policing. Legal scholars say the crisis tests the Posse Comitatus Act, which restricts military involvement in domestic law enforcement. Some experts argue the president's authority under the Insurrection Act is limited and not justified by Chicago's situation. Others note the need to protect federal property, but warn against eroding the separation between military and civilian power. Judge Immergot's ruling in Oregon emphasized the dangers of normalizing troop deployments for law enforcement. The Supreme Court may ultimately decide the limits of presidential power, with the outcome shaping federal-state relations for years. This legal debate is about more than law, it's about the future balance of power in America. Chicago has become the epicenter of America's political and cultural divide. For Trump supporters, the deployment is a show of strength and a response to failed Democratic leadership. Opponents see it as a dangerous political stunt, accusing the president of manufacturing a crisis to energize his base. The public is sharply divided, with support and opposition falling along partisan lines. Media coverage amplifies these divisions, making consensus elusive and fueling further polarization. The conflict is no longer just about crime, it's about two competing visions for America: federal authority versus local governance. Chicago is now the battleground for these opposing ideals. The outcome here will resonate far beyond city limits. The standoff in Chicago is a national reckoning, forcing Americans to confront the balance of power in our democracy. The sight of federal troops on city streets challenges the principle of state sovereignty and the limits of executive authority. The legal battles underway will set precedents for decades, defining when and how a president can deploy troops domestically. This is not just a Chicago issue, it's a constitutional one that affects every American city. The choices made now will shape the future of federalism, civil liberties, and the rule of law. As the story unfolds, it's up to all of us to stay informed, reflect, and engage in the debate. Chicago's fight is, in many ways, a fight for the soul of American democracy.